will need to follow my voice as it leads you into a relaxed state of meditation.
Welcome to the Hobby Grow podcast. I'm your host, Ben Owens, hobby grower and ghostwriter for the cannabis industry. Each week, we'll dive into my network of growers, hash makers, breeders, and mentors to give you insight into their journeys as growers, plus information you can use to grow better weed and make better hash at home. Hit subscribe, roll something up, and let's get into it. This episode, we're joined by Branham Pate, hobby grower and hemp farmer for Green Family Farms in North Greensboro, North Carolina. Branham's been growing cannabis for years as a USDA-compliant hemp farmer. For the past few years, that's included producing THCa flower and extracts. These days, he oversees cultivation, operations, and distribution for their hemp business, serving a global customer base from their farm in the Appalachian Mountains. In this episode, we'll talk about his journey as a grower, the intersection of home grows and THCa, phenohunting in a place like North Carolina, and universal advice for anyone who wants to grow anywhere. Branham, how are you?
How you doing?
I'm doing good, man. Thanks for joining me today.
Well, thanks so much for having me on. It's nice to speak with you again.
Absolutely. I always enjoy our conversations, and hopefully this is no exception. Why don't you tell everyone a little bit about what you do and sort of how you got there?
All right. So, if we want to try to time frame it and rewind, my first season of cultivation took place 2020. We started in the spring of 2020. We were able, at the time, I was actually a general manager of a pretty successful restaurant in Chapel Hill, North Carolina, which is a little more, it's in Piedmont, UNC University town. So I'm working there, and my wife Diana is actually in the CBD industry at the time, or hemp industry. She's working with another company in the space that is doing a small cultivation, which is now would be on site here at Green Family Farm. I decided one weekend, just for fun and just for my interest in cannabis kind of space, to come out to the farm and help this other company work on their cultivation. Through helping them, I met the owner of this company, and it just ended up being a very interesting Italian man named Luciano Mochio. Through helping with him, within about, 3 hours, told me I should quit my job as a very successful restaurateur, take a massive pay cut, and come work for him on this farm where I'd be driving about 3.5 hours a day round trip.
And this was based on what, your knowledge of the plant or knowledge of growing, or just your general?
Wow. Yeah. So this was basically just purely based on enthusiasm, and I can't say I had done any cultivation before I took the job. Like zero grows. I had seen other people's grows, but being in North Carolina, being in a state that didn't really have a legal avenue for cultivation until kind of right before that, 2019, 2020 is kind of when all this farm bill stuff is dropping in and everybody's actually able to cultivate cannabis here. So I will say I have allegedly been involved in some of the underground markets in North Carolina pre-hemp bill, and that I allegedly might have loved cannabis much before the farm bill came into existence, and so to speak, maybe had just been waiting most of my life into my 30s to get involved with the cannabis industry. So really just as an enthusiast and as somebody that was very interested. Um,
Very cool. So had you
kind
studied
of
like
how it
growing
happened.
somewhere, or had you
Wow, this
like
is so wild.
YouTube
No,
books, anything, like what how did you jump in it?
so I legitimately jumped in it with this company. Um, again, I had some friends that I had seen some hobby grows in their houses, maybe some like 4x4s, um, where they might have only had a couple plants in there, and I'd kind of seen them go through the process. But in terms of my own personal experience, like literally zero experience, zero reference points. I just came out to this facility with a really open mind, and just wanted to kind of just see what it was like. I really hadn't planned on being or joining the cultivation industry. I thought I had a really good thing going with this restaurant business, but gosh, it didn't take much, because the first day I came and volunteered, I volunteered my next day off from work, which I was working about 65 hours a week at the restaurants. And so I'd take my one day off a week and go volunteer. And by the third weekend, he was offering me the job 100%. Was like, you got to do it and all these things. And I'm going, I don't know. But um in the end, the real reason why I took the job is because the kind of whole the COVID bubble hit and the restaurant closed down. And kind of when I was starting to come out to this farm to volunteer, we were reopening. People were starting to do more of the takeaway stuff, and maybe starting to come back and dine in person. And I just had a really negative experience with it. And I said, yeah, I'm good. No negative experience with the owner, but just with the way that whole situation went. So I just trusted that this man I had met that moved to North Carolina by himself from Italy, moved away from his dad and his two brothers in a really successful hemp operation there, 10 acres of greenhouses on a farm in Italy, to come here. And I just kind of took the chance. This guy knew what he was doing. And I went for it. So,
That's
no
insane.
experience really, just the guidance of somebody that barely spoke English at the time.
So you sort of went in reverse, where you jumped in at scale and then have since learned a lot more about cultivation and gotten to do some smaller fun projects like hunt and
Oh, yes.
learn all sorts of new things, which we can get into. But that's cool. That's sort of the reverse journey. I feel that a lot of growers start at home and then they jump in.
Yeah, and again, a lot of it has to do with the fact that the legality issues here, like every place I had ever lived, or it's just it was such a black and white, just plain crime in the Carolinas, that you would either have to have a house that you couldn't bring anybody, and you couldn't bring your family or your friends or anybody, or you had a house where you could actually have a life. And I chose to have a life throughout this whole time period, and kind of bide my time and wait with that whole thing. So I think that's kind of how I ended up doing this kind of reverse, that I think a lot of people do on the West Coast, or maybe more in the Midwest now that cultivation has kind of gotten bigger and it's a little more widespread. But I realized when I started that I was going to need to learn a lot really fast. So you had asked me, like, what were you learning? So um, I essentially spent every day with Luciano. Once I took the position, we spent about 9 hours a day with each other every day, just talking about what we were doing and why we were doing it. And, um, and then what was, I think they had a book that a lot of people used in the 90s, which was like the Guerrilla Grower's Guide or something like that. And they'd be like, oh, read this if you want to identify the pests on the grow. That's kind of what
Okay.
he would say to me. Um, I think through him and first year, I spent a lot of time kind of using Instagram, actually, I would say, to figure out not so much the techniques that people were using, but what the products people were using, because I realized I didn't understand the feed systems or what the inputs were or how to boost the grow, right? I had no idea what was going on with that. So I spent a lot of time, because I was getting the physical practice, right? We're growing sets of 1,400 plants at a time in the greenhouse when I first start. It's like I had to do all this where I'm like, okay, I'm just going to start with salts only, basically. Like I'm sure a lot of home growers would say, oh, just salts only, and want to integrate these other things in. And so that's kind of the way I took on the concept of learning at scale, right? Was like, okay, I have this giant Walmart size space here. But I'm still going to say, like, what do I do to push the roots? What do I do to create the right environment in the soil so that we can get as close to, with using cocoa coir and independent bags, can we get as close to something that kind of activates it so that we can get a more like effect that you would get from having living soil, right? And kind of starting to dip my toes into the concept of biosyn before probably people were calling it biosyn. People were calling it probably at that time like mixed salts or something like that, where people were using inputs on top of salts. But at the time, I realized I needed to kind of try to combine both worlds, right? Right, where we're taking advantage of the biology of the plant and different triggers within the plant, but at the same time realizing that I'm growing thousands of plants at the same time and I need a little bit of simplicity.
So you're in greenhouses. Is that now, or is that that's how it was when you joined?
So when I joined, it was just a warehouse that's attached to a 200 about 160 plant mother garden, 3,200 plant veg. Then that's attached to two different chambers that would hold 1,400 plants in flower in each one. So that's how it started. We did not have like automation. We didn't have any sort of irrigation machine. We had black, like the 300-liter black irrigation tubs with a jet pump system on it, where I was like hooking into each dripper system line independently and doing it.
I was gonna say it's way bigger than most of the people who will be listening to this, I'm sure.
It's without having automation, it was kind of nuts to run something at this size, because we're like wheeling around giant ag tanks and then hooking up 1-inch hoses to the end of like meteor system drip lines. Should be like running off of 2 horsepower pumps that are connected through automation systems. And I didn't know any better because it was my first season. But I'm kind of running around with these tanks all day long doing the watering. Like plant 20 pots. Oh, alarm goes off. Go in this room. Switch this hose, this line, because each bloom chamber's 8 lines. Each veg chamber's 8 lines. So we're talking about 24 lines of plants that when they're all loaded, they have to be watered each line independently, manually.
Okay.
So like that was kind of the vibe on my first season. We were mixing the dirt ourselves, like on tarps, like
amending
filling
it
bags with by hand. So we would take like cocoa, and we would take some like peat, and take a little bit of perlite, and take a little bit of just like kind of standard soil is what they would call it, and mix it like per batch, like in these bulk batches. So you could imagine what it would be like to do 1,400 3-gallon pots this way. It would take about a week to mix the dirt and fill the bags, just all day, 8 hours a day to do stuff like that. So I started with everything. We're pretty low tech, right? We're kind of like very manual labor, very I'm like, we're doing all these things that take a little longer, so I have time to kind of see how everything works. We do all our cloning in house as well too. So while I'm mixing bags of dirt and trying to, learn how to use these irrigation systems that we're using, these manual irrigation systems, we're also doing batches of 1,600 clones at a time. So I'm planting clones for chunks of the day as well, and trying to learn how to maintain those. And let me tell you, the first year of that was not very successful, but we got it. We got the numbers we needed, but man, to look back at that was wow. To try to put out those batches, then it was just so challenging. Versus now it's just a part of the SOP now, right? It's just a part of the routine. It's time to do it. But so through doing everything so sequentially and kind of rudimentary basic, and then doing a little of my own research, and just always being somebody that's my mother always had me in her garden with her, and I had vegetable gardens when I was 5 and 6 years old that I maintained with a little bit of my mom's help as well and set up. But I was maintaining those when I was 5 or 6 years old. So I've always liked plants and kind of had a propensity for being able to grow things, but never, so it just kind of all, let's see, I ran swimming pools for a decade, so all these irrigation systems didn't scare me in any way. I was running 750,000 gallon swimming pools with 1 million bathers a year. Like, that's moving water and filtering water. This is kind of simplistic to me. So that hooking those up and how to kind of get everything running, and it just kind of all it tied together really well for me, working in the restaurant business for 8 years and keeping kitchens clean and repeating things over and over again, and keeping the processes and the equipment and all these things like just humming in a way that it's clean and sterile, but you're still like producing everything on a timely fashion, or even a weekly or bi-weekly fashion, things like that. So it kind of all tied together for me. I got really fortunate that I just was kind of consuming all these things.
And then they all sort of just fit together.
Right. And again, it also, I will say that I would, well, how do I word this correctly? I suppose I would also allegedly advise that even if you're doing commercial growing, you should still be doing the home growing as well, especially until you hit your real stride. Like, until you feel like you've got so much going on in your commercial space that you can't even breathe at home. Like, if you even have 25, 30 minutes a day, you should allegedly be running a grow at your house. And I think that was something that could have, if I did that, it could have really helped me too in the beginning, right? And having something where you have your own stuff at stake, and that you have your own time and energy vested, right? Where there's a little more pressure. Instead of just going, oh, well, and still getting a paycheck if you're at a commercial grow, right? It's like, oh, we got HLV and we have to nuke the garden. That's the owner's problem. But when you're at your, when you're the owner, it's a little different. It's a little different. You start to do things a little more.
Well, and you take ownership over your craft a little bit differently.
Right. So I think that's the main combination: researching, overlap, seeing what worked for other people, the scale I was working at, the simplicity we were doing things without over rigging it. Like, I think if I had automation at that point, I would have taken it all for granted. I wouldn't have probably realized, and I probably wouldn't take care of my machinery as well as I do, and maintain it and program it and tweak the programs within it so specifically, because I'd be like, oh, this thing's just supposed to do what it's supposed to do. And I can remember running around those tanks and three timers in my pocket, going off for one for this and one for this and one for this, and so I am very appreciative of all the automation and things like solar accumulation detectors that can help water based on my joule mole per meter squared, versus doing something where it's saying, oh, we're going to water X amount on X time, and I'm sure that can work, but I'm very thankful for the technology as well.
Yeah.
So,
Well, let's talk then a little bit about how, since you started, how you now have had sort of the freedom to have your own hobby grow, in addendum to the farm's main focused grows. Like what's that been like, and how does THCA factor in, I guess, for home grow? Like, maybe we should start there. Like, what can you, just as any everyday person, just grow as long as you are growing verified hemp genetics that are, THCA dominant and not Delta 9 dominant? Or is it because you have a hemp license that you're able to do this?
exactly. So, there isn't like a category of the USDA hemp license where it's like for home cultivation for personal use. There's several categories of, the way they're going to categorize it is going to be for outdoor, in greenhouses, in indoor, what you're growing for. There's one category for experimental, for if you're trying to find new genetics, or if you're trying to make your own genetics, right?
So
Where you're not really
phenohunting,
planning to,
seed making.
exactly, where you're not planning to sell. There's a separate nursery license, which we've maintained for 5 years as well. So, the the only reason I'm able to do any of this is because, and now that because I live on site. When you have a USDA hemp license, you're tagged with a geotag. With said geotag, then that's going to give basically your GPS coordinates to the property. Then that shows that you're licensed. If I didn't have an experimental license, or if I didn't have verified genetics, it would definitely be a really gray area for me. Like, we wouldn't be able to talk about it because it wouldn't really be within the scope of the licensing. But because of the type of permitting, and because of the type of plants we have on site and the way they're tested and verified, it works for me, and I'm very thankful for that.
Yeah, so it's sort of a small loophole in that you get a home grow if you're living on site, on property, for your licensed USDA grow.
Right, but
Because it's all licensed because it's the whole property.
in the same token, that home grow is for experimental genetics only, and it would not be sold in any way.
Right, which
So
is
that's,
hobby.
that again, big part of also, I think, with home grows on the West Coast that are allowed, right? It's not allowed to really be doing cultivation there and turning around and saying, no, this is for other people.
Right.
So I mean, it kind of sort of starts to fall in line with the whole sort of West Coast vibe of being able to have your own personal plants.
So how hard
But
is it for you to get licensed? Like, how hard is it for that property to stay licensed?
so maintaining the license is not the issue.
Okay.
The real issue is going to be initially getting the license. The most challenging part for most people in getting the license, the way the farm bill is worded, is a lot of people have never been in agriculture before that wish to acquire said license. And they basically made it a very easy lateral transition for people already in agriculture by saying, if you have already grown things, flowers, food, whatever, right? If you've already grown agricultural products and sold said agricultural products and can prove it with receipts, then if you essentially, all you have to do is fill out the paperwork, declare an address, declare a geotag location, pay the money, and you could receive the licensing. That's just the first round
Okay.
of licensing that went out.
And when you say money, are you talking like a $500 license fee or like 20 grand? Like
No, not even
what-
close to that. It's been so long since we've done anything like that, but it's way less than you would imagine for that part, right?
Okay.
I want to say, gosh, it's been so long since I've even messed with this. I know it's under $1,000 a year to renew it. If
That's
it's more than that, yeah, I mean, if we're talking more than that, then maybe because there's multiple types of permits that have to be under the same license, but it's relatively accessible in terms of the expenditure of the actual physical license. Now, let's get into where it gets more expensive, right? So where it gets more expensive is to sell hemp, you have to verify that the plant you're growing is not medical cannabis and that it's in fact a hemp product or certifies as a hemp product in the way that the Farm Bill words this, is that it's a product that the pre-harvest test is under 0.3% Delta 9. Not total T, but Delta 9. So THC A, B, none of these other CBD, CBG, none of these things factor into this, right? It's just about certifying the Delta 9 at under 0.3%. So to get this rolling, right, you have to start by claiming your acreage with your local FSA, right? So your like local USDA or your farm services agency, right? Because the farm services agencies for each individual county are going to be the ones that you're going to interact with to declare the crops, right? Because everybody that's declaring crops in my county is going to them, from tobacco to soybean to corn to whatever. We're going to the same place because it's a USDA program. Although it's federal, it's still being aggregated. The data is being aggregated by the local people, right, and submitted. So you have to start by claiming what you're growing, when you started it, the total acreage of that, and so that's phase one, right? If we're talking like creating a chain of custody, right, or so from there, once you've gone to them, then you have your crop declared. Okay, so from that point, you have 21 days to get DEA certified sampler, however you want to refer to it, to come and sample your grow. All right. Now, they won't sample it if there's not bud formation, so you can't call them after like 3 days or a week or something, right? They're gonna, and you also can't just say, oh, well, I'll call them right when the buds form, because the crop has to be harvested within 30 days of this sample taken, right?
Okay.
So you've got to push it all the way to the max because you want to make sure that you can finish your bloom and that you don't have to cut it early.
Right.
And,
So you're looking to test, within the sort of window of optimal ripeness that intersects with the desired TAC.
compliance, yeah, right.
Okay. And
Because again,
sorry, go
if
ahead.
it tests when you're declaring this, right? So say I have 8 rows, right? And I have 8. I generally run 8 different genetics, right? Sometimes I'll just run 7. Sometimes, it generally it's 8. on the money over and over again. There might only be once that in a year that I'll double down on one row and like repeat something in a chamber. But that each one of those independent rows has to be claimed and declared and tested by the sampler, and shown that it at that time period that it's at the pre-harvest threshold of 0.3 delta 9, right? And so I have 8 different genetics in there all at once. And we all know that all these plants are unique chemovars, right? They have unique behaviors, unique chemical expressions, right? So the fact that the miracle here is that people did the hunting work to find all this stuff that expresses this way, so that I can test 8 different genetics. I choose between day 20 and day 21 to test based on what I have in the chamber. If there's something I'm like, I generally, though, I do between those 2 days. It works more out based on the weekend than where the weekend lands than anything else.
Okay, but so you're looking at like an 8-week total cycle then. Like if that's the test, then you have.
Yeah, I mean, I realistically, you have till day 50 or day 51.
Okay.
If you're not, I mean, so this also
Because
plays
at
into
that
the
point,
genetics
what?
you have
Like
to grow.
the delta 9 starts to peak.
Well, at that point, you're in violation technically of the entire process, because again, the way the chain works is the pre-harvest test has to be day 21. The harvest has to be within 30 days of that pre-harvest test.
But you
And
could
so
test
this
at day 28 and you could harvest at day 58. You're just
yes.
and you're
Well, no,
pushing your
because
boundaries.
well, no, because they want a pre-harvest test should be done in the first 3 weeks.
Oh, okay. So you have to test.
So there's a little bit of stuff going on here, right? Where it makes this complicated, and bless the people that realized there was money in this 3 years ago, that really started doing the genetic selection and the massive testing that was required to start to find these versions, right? Because you can't say like the A flower lemon cherry gelato is not the cut that's running around the medical game. Right. I mean, none of them are the exact same cuts. They might be phenotypically similar in the smells and structures and colors and stuff, but in the end, they're looking for that genetic expression that's holding back the THCA and not converting it into the delta 9.
Right, and doing so in a shorter flowering window.
Yeah, man. Yeah, which we both kind of know through a lot of the intense breeding that's taken place in the last 20 years. The times have shortened drastically for so many things. I mean, it's wild because I've got some stuff that, I mean, it finishes in 6 weeks. It's insane, and it's fully done. This is not low yielding either. This is great looking stuff. 6 weeks.
And those are type 3, or those are type, like what? Like are they're a flower that's like just a fast.
It's just quick. Yeah, it's just so quick. I don't know if it had to do with part of the breeder plants they used to get it to express as a flower, right? Because my take on the breeding is that they found a male or a female that could be converted for pollen, right? That kind of gave those traits, right? The faster flower, the gene missing for the switch over of the acid to the delta 9, right? Because that's really what they're looking for, is this like missing code on the DNA that's telling the THC acid to flip to delta 9. I mean, that's...
So the 8 genetics you run, those are your production genetics that have been tested and verified, and you know that they're, they've been hunted to be compliant. Then the experimental license, which in essence is the quote unquote home grow on site, is the smaller, you're looking for new flavors and plants and things. How does that like it's essentially a phenohunting license. This is the way it sounds. So how does testing work for that? Like when you finish your harvest, are you still having to test everything? If you pop 12 seeds of something, you're testing each plant, or are you selecting, and then that plant that's been selected is then put through the testing process to verify that it can be run?
So through that, right, we're gonna kind of, I look for stuff. You got to look for stuff you want, right? And then with experimental, if you don't get to like test it and use it, you lose it, right? So it's not
Okay.
something where they're like, oh yeah, you know, if you've got experimental, we're cool with whatever, you know, just do whatever with it. This is not the case, right? It's like if you're doing that, the expectation is if you're not testing stuff, that you're gonna get rid of the material, and so it's a little disappointing, right?
Yeah.
But you know, when you find, we've actually found quite a few genetics in this manner, just
Okay.
through kind of doing this. Now, when you're doing this large scale cultivation, right? Like there has to be. I'm in my own little universe here, right on the East Coast, so I kind of come up with my own terminology and my own concepts out here. So, what you need with this scale of commercial cultivation is you need a lot of alley-oops. You need a lot of cuts that are guaranteed going to work. You're not going to have to burn them or throw them away, or if you test them wrong by one day, you're going to have to burn the whole crop. Or you see what I'm saying? You need these things that are guaranteed locks, right? To guarantee that you're going to get the money to pay the payroll and keep the lights on and provide the money for the next season's dirt and the nutrients and everything like that, so that you can have these small spaces where it just doesn't matter, right? And you're not basing your success or anything. Like if I had to do if I did it in a chamber here and I did a whole row of 180 plants, to keep that would cost me so much money. It would be insane. And then also my assumption would be within that a lot of it, the testing would reveal that we couldn't keep it anyways and it had to be destroyed, right? So within this A flower space, what I've learned in it being this far along, and is that the space for experimentation has to kind of fit where you're at with what you're yielding on the other side. So if your production is just crushing, then you could have a little more space for experimentation. But if your production and you're going, every single grow is like coming down to the gram and wondering if you're going to make payroll or buy the next batch of nutrients or something, then no, you don't have any room for experimentation. And you better be slam dunking everything you can, right? You better be hitting all those alley oops. You better be, you know, catching them in 360 windmill and those things so that you get your money right.
Okay.
So that part is, it's bittersweet, I guess, is the into a long answer. It's
A lot of
bittersweet,
plants getting
right?
cold.
What's that?
A lot of plants getting cold, it sounds like.
Yeah, and then you know that seeds aren't cheap. So,
Yeah.
um, but it really, what I've only do it once a year now, the hunting process.
Okay.
Um, in the end, I only really do the hunting process. What I end up growing are, and aside from that, is stuff that I know is compliant and I know
Right.
it certifies. And you know, and
But you're culling
then,
weak plants and you're culling males and you're pulling all those things. So even if you are popping a pack, you know,
oh
like you
yeah,
might have 4, say, out of a 10 pack that end up getting to flip, and maybe by week 2, week 3, when you're considering testing, maybe 1 or 2 of those have just been lagging behind. So it does,
oh
there's some
yeah,
natural selection to the process, I imagine.
100%. And so it's like it is sort of intuitive and it works kind of as a natural thing. But you just have to because I'm around so many plants, because I'm around so much cultivation and so many things, it makes it a little easier to separate from it, right? Because if it was my only stuff and I had to do that to all my, it would just be, I mean, it would just be so disappointing, because it's like years and months of your lives you just won't get back. But kind of, it's the nature of the beast for what I'm doing here. If I want to try to find something that works in my space, I have to kind of be smart about it.
But it's cool to to have that home grow space to hunt and have the freedom, because the production genetics are dialed in and the operations are set up so that you, like you said, like you get to experiment a little more and seek out new flavors and new options that can still fall under the compliant bucket and maybe end up in production.
Right. And then, of course, in the A-flower game, the holy grail of A-flower plants is a compliant plant that washes for hash as well. So.
You beat me to it. I was going to ask. So once you harvest these compliant A flowers, you can then wash them, and as long as you're not subjecting them to heat, there shouldn't be any decarboxylation, and that chain of custody is maintained. And is that in theory how a THCA extract is brought to life? Or I guess walk us through that. Like, how does an A flower become a hash?
Right. Okay. So there are a lot of ways to get to the same end path with this question. And there's a lot of people that use a lot of different methodologies. Some people are very candid and will tell you exactly how they're doing it. Some people will create names and techniques for things that are actually very simple, and they're just trying to kind of carve out a space for themselves where they're the only person that does it this way, right? But with the stuff, it's few and far between that you're going to find one of these plants that actually works like this, because the genetic selection is not for, and the genetic pool that's being pulled from to generate these plants and these seeds, right? These working, I call them working hemp genetics, right? Or plants that certify. The selection is not for hash production. The selection is for, it's parallel to the same genetic within the medical space, right? It's for what it looks like, and is it compliant, and is there a lot of resin, or what's the structure like? It's not like, oh yeah, what's the wash percentage, right? This doesn't factor in any way of when these plants are kind of coming into existence and trying to be found, right? When people are trying to hunt them. So when you do find one of these like kind of golden gooses, I mean, the wash methodology is the same, right? And where you get into more interesting areas is like you're talking about is like really the only way to try to do it purely unadulterated would be doing a cold cure, right? Which would be a piatella, right? It would be like oh
yeah, because no press at all.
And I've seen a ton of this, honestly, but the sad thing is that it's not 9119, it's full spec, so the colors are not there, and the resin drip isn't really there, and the gooiness isn't there the way you think of like slicing it like fudge with too much butter in it, right? This isn't what's going on. It's a bit drier and a bit, but again, it's achieving compliance in that really when we start to get into products too, it's about like how much is in each gram of that rosin, right? So no matter, all that matters for it to be compliant is that in a gram that there's less than 0.3% of delta 9. So so some people might add things, to generate this. Let's say that
So
Some
it's like a
people do.
blend. I mean, you can
Right.
turn it
Let's
into
say
a
some
blend of.
people, exactly. So if you do put heat on it, and let's say you put heat on it, and now you've got something that's 1%, right? Well, I mean, we both know that a isolate exists, right? THCA isolate exists. CBD isolate exists. I don't know. Again, this is where I'm saying it's like there's a lot of paths to this destination. I don't know how everybody does it, right?
Right.
Um,
But in
I'll,
theory, from a hashing perspective, if you've got a compliant flower, those resin heads are compliant. You're just doing everything you do is cold. There's no heat applied, and it's either a full melt product or a cold cured, hash product or um, something along those lines. Then that chain of custody is maintained. That
mhm.
there's no heat that's been applied, and so even at a concentrated level, you're maintaining all of the things needed to be compliant with the sandbox.
Right. And through having a relationship with your lab and being able to send it to them and them saying, okay, this is what it is at right now, then you can decide the methodology that you want to take to put your product out there that is the, cleanest, best smoking, best tasting, best effect, bang for your buck product. From a lot of things that I've seen coming through the markets, it it that it's mostly something they're going to whip something back into it, right? So just like you would whip any hash rosin, these guys are going to mechanically whip something in there, again, whether
CBD
it's
isolate, terpenes.
isolate, distillate. You really hope that they're not putting terpenes in it, because that's trash. um if you're making rosin and you have a hasher, you shouldn't add terpenes, right? And that's where in my game, a lot in a business, I probably uh, divide from a lot of the people that are in it at this point, where we start to get into a conversation of adulterating things with compounds that aren't in them at all. I can sort of understand adding isolate back into things or distillate. But when we start talking about, food grade terpenes, or even hemp, naturally extracted terpenes, you start to lose me.
Okay.
With all, or not you specifically, but
Yeah, yeah.
within the A market, like you will never convince me that that's a good idea, or like good for the consumer, or creating a better product. Like, I'm not necessarily here to stand on a soapbox and argue against the spray pack dudes, but um, it's where I kind of draw the line in the sand.
Yeah.
It ultimately is why I was so willing to take on the A flower challenges, because at the time, before the year before A flower kicked 3 years ago, everybody was spraying their CBD flower with Delta 8 terpene blends, and they were tumbling them in like these big metal, um, essentially like produce tumblers, and shooting hot distillate with terpenes mixed into it, and spinning it, and then like kind of like a dryer almost, but shooting this glaze is what I used to call it on there, and then sitting it out, and then everyone was shaking Keith from who knows what plant on the exterior to hide the fact that it had been sprayed with these distillate Delta 8 and terpenes, and like I was just like, oh, get me out of here.
I
Like,
think,
I did
yeah, I
not.
mean, I think most home growers are anti-adult adulterated products.
And for a year, that's what they did to the CBD. Like, for a year in this CBD industry, you had to take this beautiful CBD flower you would grow, and people would buy it from you and just think of it as a carrier, like a sponge. Like, like just like
Yeah.
just like a piece of styrofoam that they were spraying this thing on, these like compounds and chemical compounds on, and that's what people wanted, because part of the reason why my wife got out of the store side of things is because after a couple years, um she would come home and say it's just nuts. Like they just all people do is come in and goes. The next follow-up question when I show them a product is, yeah, but does it get me high? She's like, well,
Right.
no, this isn't the psychoactive plant. And it's like she has to go on this whole educational side of things, and it's like, and when this Delta 8 dropped, it made these people all so happy. And luckily, she was out right around the time this started to come in, because I don't think her mind she couldn't have handled it.
Well, and there's things that are, I don't want to say safe because we don't have any data on a lot of this stuff, but like there are things that are theoretically not harmful that when created in a lab setting by someone with actual experience synthesizing compounds, yeah, there's probably a good chance it's lower risk. I'm speaking about like Delta 8. Like if you're in a lab making it from the purest ingredients for the purest purposes of research, there's a good chance there's probably nothing terribly wrong with that substance. But that's not what's floating around the street being sprayed on buds. It's a lot of these people who've figured it out, and maybe they have a science background. Hopefully they have some science background, but probably they're like a lot of us home growers who are just really good at researching and going down rabbit holes.
Right, weed science, right?
Yeah,
Weed
weed
HD,
science.
right? You got your
So
weed HD. Most people say.
yeah, the bro
Common
science
knowledge.
says. So on that note, speaking a little bit about cleanliness, you and I have talked a little bit about this, but one of the pushes, that I hear from home growers is that they want a clean product that's not adulterated, but also maybe wasn't sprayed or wasn't microwaved or wasn't some of these other concerns.
Yeah.
And commercial weed, a lot of it, there are exceptions to every rule, but a lot of it has some of these processes in place because growing at scale is harder than doing it when you have 6 plants and you can spin every plant around and give every plant individual love and care. So where does THCA flower, like in your experience, fall in that cleanliness spectrum? Like, is it, as an unregulated space, are operators, doing the right thing? Like, I know you and I have talked about sort of what you've implemented, but it seems much more intense than what you're required to go by.
So, I mean, you're gonna catch within this in the Carolinas. I can speak on North Carolina. Here in North Carolina, with the way the growers work, it's a very interesting spectrum. You're gonna catch the whole spectrum from like a person that has grown tobacco and crops that they are just spraying the craziest, most gnarly things on. Because here in North Carolina, we're dealing with caterpillars, spider mites, aphids, fungus gnats, thrips. I mean, there's a pretty wide gamut of pests that are already here in place in North Carolina that absolutely love the cannabis plant. But a lot of them happen to like the tobacco plant as well. So here in North Carolina, I am mixed a bunch amongst plots of tobacco fields, all in the same kind of community as me. So we're sharing bugs as well between our crops. Um, right.
Unique challenges growing near tobacco fields.
Man. So I stepping in was taught in a way of simplicity where we were using things that were like, much more chemical. Bayer, Syngenta, like really being
Like ag
somebody that,
products.
yeah, very, very mainstream, very like chemical, right? Petroleum based stuff, right? Very like wear the white Tyvek suit and goggles and gloves and boots every time, because who knows what's, there's 2 types of poisoning, right? As somebody that applies pesticide, you have to understand there's acute and chronic poisoning, and most of what we do in the cannabis space is not going to be acute poisoning. It's going to be chronic poisoning. Is something that if you don't realize what you're doing and you spray forward through, or you don't walk backwards, or when you mix it, you don't use gloves and you touch it every time, and it's something that's toxic if you do it for 25 years, right? It's not like you touch it and then you fall over dead. That's not really what we work in the cannabis business. So dealing and what the scary thing within this for me is that there's a very chemical side of thing that people do with the mold side, and then there's a very chemical side that people do with the bug side. So if you're dealing with a more chemical methodology for dealing with these cannabis plants, you're looking at, if you really want to rotate modalities, you're going to spray 7 different things on your plants, 7 different chemicals on your plants, through different life stages. And then the last 3 to 4 weeks, based on the things you'll have available, you won't be able to spray anything. You'll just have to sacrifice several plants to whatever predators, like a sacrifice on Kong's Island, right? And just like leave them alone. Don't touch them. The bugs won't spread, right? So there's that methodology, right? And that's how tobacco farmers do it. They spray them with this crazy toxic stuff, and they rip them, and then in September and in August they don't spray anything, and then in July and August and in the beginning of September they don't spray much of anything, and then they harvest, right? That doesn't really work for cannabis. You can't really not spray the last 3 weeks. That's probably when most of the pests bloom the most, in the last several weeks of them. So this is how I dropped in, was this very chemical methodology, and that's because of North Carolina being in an alternate ag state of people trying to transition across the agricultural realm, which a lot of them found out this doesn't really work well, but I think that's another podcast for another day. Right. But these people tried to go about this in a very chemical and, Syngenta Bayer kind of way. And the reality of it is that you need to be going with things that are much more natural and much more, usable to the finish of it. And that things that are synergistic, that both treat for the bugs and for mold and mildew and all these other like powdery mildew and mold. Botrytis really is the issue here. We don't really have much issues with powdery mildew like you guys do out west, but you can get it if you mess around and don't get good airflow. You'll get it here too, but much less problems with that. Much more issues with the bud rot here, right? The classic bud rot. So I've journeyed into this much cleaner version. Over time, it's much more labor intensive. It's much more cost intensive.
But that's not the trend. That's not that you're the exception, not the rule on that front. And as far as what you've seen in the industry,
right? Because allegedly, I was producing my own stuff early on, and I didn't want to put that shit on there. Sorry, but I didn't want to. But that's what I think of it as. It's just trash. I didn't want to put that on there. I mean, I don't take Tylenol. I don't really eat McDonald's. Like, why would I smoke something with these insane? Something called Wrangler had been sprayed on it, right? It's like, what? No, thank you.
It's scary to think
it works,
what we've smoked.
Dude,
I mean, you think about decades ago when people were doing this in the boonies, and you sprayed what you could get, whatever that was, and we all smoked a fair amount. I guess I smoked a fair amount of off-market weed in Missouri back before there was a market, and I'm sure it was covered in all sorts of fun stuff. It's funny, actually. I had a guy that always used to have just this amazing bud. It was different than anyone else in the college town. And at the time, I just thought he was just super plugged in. And now, 15 years later, as a grower, I'm like, he probably had a tent, and he was just really quiet about it. That's probably what was going on.
Homie was using his bio. He was getting his biosyn on. He had probably a little CO2 feed. He's probably matching his, light to his CO2 feed and just getting it cranking, in the end.
So I do want to keep, mindful of your time. And I want to dive into some rapid fires here. But before we do that, I wanted to walk through this because this is where my mind keeps circling. I had to keep
Sure.
refocusing back on what we were talking about is,
Hmm.
okay, so if I, like, hypothetical situation, right? I'm an individual in North Carolina, and I'm listening to this podcast, and I'm like, wow, this is really cool. I own property, and I don't have any interest in selling product either to distributors or to wholesalers or to retail or direct to consumer. I don't have any interest in that. But I would love to just pheno hunt in my back. I've got a 1,000-foot garage that I'd love to, I park my Jeep in, and I'd pull it out and I'd just set it up as a pheno hunt as an experimental license. So if I was thinking about something like that, and then I went about it, I got the license, I hunted, I found a couple cuts, the process. Then once I find cuts, then I'm like, okay, I've hunted these, I've done the testing, these are the ones who made it, they were compliant. Could I then sell those cuts to someone like you, or then that would require the nursery license you were talking about?
Boom, boom. There you go. You just tied it in right there. So you need the nursery license, right,
Okay.
to make that happen in the end. And I also, okay. So my take on that is like that would be for me as the North Carolinian, that would be the ideal scenario for that. The testing though is just going to put you in the dirt unless you have just an insane amount of disposable income. You're looking. It's not the license isn't the issue. The issue is to have the products tested, right?
Right.
And so that's where it's like it.
You have to have some
The
sort of income
pre-harvest and
coming
the
in to
post-harvest.
justify that expense.
To test 2 lots on my last indoor I tested, just to put it in perspective, and to do a remediation on a lot, meaning a resampling on a lot that tested a little hot in the pre-harvest, it almost cost $2,000 just for the sampler to come out and test and submit it to the lab, and then the lab to test it. And that's just
So if
for
you were
2
doing
lots.
4 plants in a pheno hunt, you'd be testing each of those plants separately to the tune of $1,000 a plant, basically.
I mean, to see if it's compliant, yes, 100%. That's where we're going with that, right? And then now you're making your life a little more complicated because you're like trying to figure out how to declare the acreage on your 4x4 tent, right? So you're
Right.
saying,
Well,
all
or
right,
maybe
so
you've got a
lot
shed,
A is like 0.0000125 acres, right? And it's like, and so you do that, and if you ran, I mean, we're talking about a ton of money for that function. I know there's some places that have just functioned as breeders and nurseries and things like that in the Carolinas and been very successful, but I think with those places that put that as their main function, I saw them in year 3, year 4 kind of really struggle. Year 2, 3, 4 really struggle,
Okay.
because it's like putting all your eggs into one basket, right? Like the places that stick around with this have all the licensing formats. They have all the different formats, or
And
they
they're
have
hunting
all the
in-house.
right, or you're lucky enough to have people intrastate, right, that are also doing this. Washington, or I know that there's people all over, right? Colorado, California. There are other people that are working right in the A-flower space that have USDA licenses for nurseries, and you can, right, we can ship things back and forth with them. And that's, I honestly think that if you're really going to in this space, because of the costs associated with it, right, and like the price per pound sort of being at this all-time historical low, you need to have more access to the clone depots and stuff like that are going to give you the cuts are going to work.
Shout
And
out
then
Corey.
right, the guys like that, right, that are going to really have all the cuts you need, and it's going to be what they say it's going to be, right? Find a
Right.
place, like you have to find your places like that. We've just been
So clone
fortunate.
seeds, like that's all kosher and fair game, as because it doesn't have THC, so it falls under the hemp bill.
Right. The issue is if you start growing a bunch of stuff and you don't have your testers coming out and you're not really showing them what you're doing, like, right. It's like, we get pretty semi-frequent pictures with semi-cryptic, or, somewhat cryptic, but we get pictures of satellite photos of our farm throughout the year from the government. Um, if you're at your house and they can't see inside your house, right, then it's like,
Yeah,
I
show
don't
up.
know how they check on you, right? I don't know if they send out an officer or whatever, or, these guys that are the collectors and inspectors and the labs are all DEA certified and licensed. That means that they've had to go through some sort of process to be certified by the DEA and likely have some pretty serious penalties if they're not following the rules correctly, right? So
So, and would
it's
you say
complicated.
like, yeah, I mean, it sounds complicated because I'm in my head, I'm like, okay, I figured it out. I'm gonna go get an
Right.
experimental license, and I'm gonna get a nursery license. It's great. I figured out how to do a home grow in North Carolina. But it sounds like you're looking at $10,000-$20,000 probably if you're hunting a few packs just for the shits and giggles of it. That's probably not
Right.
a
And then if
viable
you're not
hobby.
and if you're not testing it and you're skirting the line there, well, your GPS coordinates are certified with Washington D.C. Um, you've given them access to this geotag, right?
Right.
Because you have the license. It's kind of like sort of the real ID concept where now you're an open door, right?
Right.
At that point, and it's like, uh, you know, it
Well,
might just be more worth it to um, stick with the old methodology of North Carolina and just keep to
shut
yourself.
up.
I guess is
Yeah.
we used to call it drinking a glass of shut the up, right? Just drink a
Right.
nice tall glass of it, shut the up, and everything will be just fine.
Yeah, I had a buddy here that said that they used to refer to, he would ask people, well, are you able to keep your closet door shut? Like, and if the answer is yes, or if you can keep your basement, if you can keep people out of your basement, then maybe you can have whatever hobby you want,
Yeah.
But
Right,
if you have a
and
tendency to talk
allegedly
about
it could
things,
be growing, right?
right?
But
Allegedly, it could be gone. And on that note, I have seen in other markets that hemp is big, Texas being one of the most
mhm.
obvious, that there's this massive renewed interest in home grow. And we all know that prior to legalization, home grow is what kept the industry alive. Like, it happened regardless of where everybody's legal status was. But now that there are these hemp markets, some of them seem more permissive of home grow. But it doesn't sound like North Carolina, at least on the books, is any more permissive than it once was.
I think that you should consider it sort of like the alleged clandestine grows in West Coast states that are unlicensed and unregistered.
Right.
Right. Just because there's a medical license, so I hear those words come up a lot. It's unlicensed, it's clandestine, whatever. It's gray market or it's black market, right? I mean, you couldn't call it gray market because they don't have a legal business, but that's existing everywhere, right? In different sports, they have different penalties for different infractions, but if you don't get caught in those sports, you don't get the penalties.
Right.
I
So
don't
it
know if
sort
the
of
game
gives
of
you a
life
little
is
bit
that.
more permissive culture.
Yeah, I don't know if the game of life, if it's that simple as to say that, right? Where it's like, oh, that's like not getting a penalty or not getting a yellow card in soccer when you should have gotten one, right? It's not. I don't think it's that simple, right? Because we're talking about jail time and prison time and these things, but again, when your state decriminalizes marijuana, right? When I was in um high school, when people would go for summer break to the beach, and if the cops pull them, they would keister their cannabis, right, to
Right.
stay out of jail and not get in trouble with their parents. To now it's a ticket, and they just take it and pour it out on the side of the street. I mean, we're in a totally, and there's all the tobacco stores will sell you a hookah, a bong, and a flower. I mean, and if it's in some of these places, they could call themselves dispensaries, and they'll sell you every grade of, they'll sell you all kinds of wax and you name it. I mean, it's like we've gone from 3 years ago, people,
So people are sort of, they know that there's less attention. The target's, a little bit smaller, at least, or a little bit bigger, I guess we should say, that just because you have a flower product or just because you're interested in growing or just because you visit the hydro store now is not alone enough, because you could be a
right.
hemp grower.
Well, 100%, 100%, 100%. And I would purely recommend to anybody that is a hobbyist is to work in cash as much as they can. Do not
Yeah.
then not to sign up necessarily for rewards point memberships or anything that kind of puts you on the map.
Right.
These
Hey,
things, a
you've
lot of
spent
people
$20,000
love
at your
getting
local
those
grow
little
store.
keychains, right? And or whatever. It's like, you don't really want that on your Visa bill, right? Because it's always on your Visa bill.
Yeah.
Forever
Well,
and ever. And it's like, again, it's like, how tall is that glass of shut up can how tall can you drink?
do you
How
see a
cold?
lot of enforcement? I mean, as far as like, do you
Yeah.
hear about other growers rated or shut down for doing, for operating sort of in the gray?
The unlicensed stuff, it doesn't last here. And I heard about some, early on with it, and if it's any sort of unlicensed larger agriculture operation, I haven't seen it necessarily working out that well. But this is a big state with a lot of agricultural land where some people have hundreds of acres. It wouldn't be beyond the realm of possibility, right?
But
That
you're not hearing about like, oh,
not a ton of
in
it.
the
No, I hear
they're
about.
raiding, homes and
Okay,
your
no,
friend
not
down the
no.
street.
So here's what I hear about that when they raid the shops down here. It's mostly for copyright infringement, like they have bongs or something that's themed. Rick and Morty was a hot one a couple years ago. And so like these trademarked characters and these different
Yeah.
things, right? They're coming down here and just crushing shops for that. They are grabbing all their products to test them for compliance. So they'll take all their flour and their pre-rolls and all that stuff when they do that, but they're not coming for that initially. Now, the real thing is a money laundering situation. So if people are operating and supposedly selling flour, but then they're really selling cocaine, okay, which this I've heard of this here in North Carolina, or a business 15 miles from here was
Like, not even
selling
close.
cannabis. Look, I know, right? Cannabis drinks that had meth in them.
Oh
Um,
shit.
yeah, right. So yeah, reverse. Not the same with us. It must have been calling it a sativa drink. I don't know. But so it's amazing the things you'll hear about in terms of that. But the money laundering, right? The copyright infringement, that seems to actually be the triggers
Okay.
to have them come in. And if I've heard about shops getting raided if people are kind of like under the counter selling things, like if you
Okay.
say the special word, you can get the non-compliant vapes at the table or flour or something like that. Those shops are just getting destroyed. They're
Right.
not lasting.
But
But
again,
I'm not hearing
going back to,
about
can you
home
keep your mouth
grows.
shut?
Yeah, and I'm not hearing about home grows going after people and all these things like that, right? Because I still think in general we're only 3 years in this window where there hasn't been total prohibition, and even now it's pretty prohibitive. I mean, you kind of have to be one of
Well, it's way more intricate. I mean,
right.
based on what you've shared, but like you said, it's sort of like getting pulled over for speeding and then they search your car. It's,
Mhm.
if you weren't speeding, then you probably would have gotten away with whatever you were on your way to do.
Right, right. And so I think that I really think that when you hit the decriminalization button, it changes things quite a bit. Because
Yeah.
when it stops going from like 1 gram or some seeds goes to a trip to jail, right?
Right.
It changes things a lot, because it's like that's a lot less of complexity to just get a
Yeah.
ticket, right, than it is to actually be booked and et cetera, and deal with the public scrutiny and the heavier charges on your records and things like that, right?
Yeah, I mean, especially if, I don't know what the fine and the penalties are for cultivation. Usually it's more than possession, but if cultivation is decriminalized and it's just a ticket, man, then so what? They show up and they find you got to grow. Well, here's your ticket. Take it all down. Like you're not
Well,
going to jail. You're not, or maybe you are, I guess.
well, on the growing side, with the unpermitted grows, yeah, they're taking people to jail. But the possession, right? And then there's this other gray area, though, right, too, where it's like if you have your A flower and you have the paperwork that says it tests compliant, the right police officer with the right packaging is letting people go. Now,
Right.
if you're smoking it while you're driving, it's DUI. You're going to get got for that, right? But you're not going to get the ticket for marijuana
Right.
possession. You'll just get a DUI.
Yeah. Well, it's like you're not in
Worse, but
trouble for having alcohol, but you can't drive while you're drinking it.
right. So it adds these kind of newer. It's just an interesting area. But I am 41 years old, and in 3 years I haven't forgotten what it was like my whole life.
Yeah.
I haven't forgotten that long, and I don't assume, I'm not naive enough to think that the government doesn't go backstep on stuff like this either, right? So
Right.
I am very with open ears paying attention to what's going on legislatively with everything.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. And actually is one of the things I wanted to ask you about here as we wrap this up. So we have talked about your first commercial setup, for the greenhouses and how that sort of has evolved. I don't know, if your experimental setup, if it's small, if it's something you'd want to talk through, your first grow setup, or if that's any
Okay, so how
different.
about this? I'll do the first set and then the first alleged set, and then we'll do
Yeah.
kind of what I'm running now.
Okay.
So the first alleged setup was a 4x2 with a 600-watt blurple and a 200-watt blurple. Man, what was I just running? 3-gallon grow bags, straight cocoa coir with a little bit of perlite in it, a floor fan, and a carbon filter.
Okay.
And that was my first grow, man, right there. Boom, 6-inch
Awesome.
floor fan, and
Water
yeah,
only.
so no, I'm using salts. So in the beginning of my game with this, we were actually making our own blend. So we're getting all the base elements and mixing our own AB, like AB veg and AB bloom, and then the bloom actually was a 4-part 2-phase, which I eventually narrowed that down. But so I was using salt only though, but stuff that we were making in-house here.
Okay.
So it's like really fresh agricultural salts, right? That are geared towards cannabis. No inputs, nothing. Just
Okay.
yeah. I don't even know if I was pH. No, I was pHing it. Okay, I was pHing. So just salts and pH, properly pH'd. So now, and now if we're fast forwarding 5 years, I'm using I'm using let's see, this is 8 by, no, it's bigger than that. Hold on. We're talking like 10 by 12 or 14. We're talking like a glass house, basically.
Okay.
So we're not playing it indoors. I always tell my guys here and the people that were this business, my trap is depths. Okay, we make our money growing depths. That's our trap. The indoor is the flex. It's because we have enough money. I wouldn't have 400 chambers and a 250 chamber if I didn't grow a lot of good depths. It wouldn't happen. So where I think a lot of people would think, oh, the indoor is like this like intuitive must thing, and truthfully, it's a flex. It's
Oh,
just to
wow.
keep us going in the winter, right? And
Okay.
then we happen to grow great indoor because that's what we do. And shout out to my guy Stevie McDaniel here on site that really takes it on to kind of we'll say if I had an apprentice for indoor, that would be him, right? That would be my Padawan. So shout out to Stevie McDaniel. He definitely has helped me push it to the next level with the indoor. But my trap is the depths, man. That's where my bread and butter is. I don't disrespect what pays my bills.
Absolutely. And you're hunting then in depths as well?
Yeah. I love the depth hunt in my chamber. We already did the beginning of the season one. Um, it gave us two things to test, so we were excited about that.
Yeah. I mean, when you're running 8 strains, that's potential for
Yeah,
a whole new part of the catalog.
right. But my personal set, when I was doing, so I had 4 8x2 tables in there that 42 plants. Each one was in 9 liters of dirt. Um, I'm running just the sun, no light assist. I don't need it. I was hand tarping at the time, so I
Okay.
was throwing a tarp every morning and every evening. I was pulling it in the morning and throwing it in the evening, and that's wild. I did that for over 100 days this summer. I'll probably never do that again. To be
That's good
tethered
shit.
to something like that specific time of day for over 100 days is insane. I got a couple exhaust fans, a dehumidifier in there, and two exhaust fans, and then one floor fan, and it's hand watered fan, and I got a trellis net up in there. But that is, I mean, I like that's my hobby grow is kind of nuts.
Yeah.
To be honest, but
That's cool though.
it's hand watered, and to me it just kind of is easy. Honestly,
Yeah, no, it's dope though. I mean, it's cool to hear. Like it's a very unique situation you're in, which is part of why I wanted to talk to you about this because to have the ability to one have a lot of plants, obviously that's a cool freedom, but two to be able to do it in a place that's otherwise pretty restrictive. So
yeah, crazy,
even if you have to jump through the hoops to get to do it. So
right?
so let's run through a couple more questions, man, and then I will let you plug yourself here. What are 3 genetics that you're running, or maybe the 2 that you guys found, if you want to name them, or if you've got a few breeders that you have been enjoying or excited about, or are looking forward to popping and hunting some of their gear?
Okay, so I'd say right now my favorite cuts that I'm running, since well, my favorite cuts I'm running right now. All right, I've got a cut of punch breath. That's crazy. I love it. Um, it's like blueberry vanilla yogurt. It's really good. It's kind of sour in the finish. It's really sweet blueberry at the front. I have I have probably the gassiest cut of Z ever, which I refer to as, since no one will touch Z like it's a hot potato, I refer to this as grape candy gas.
Okay.
I have a compliant cut there that is like, the name says it all right. It is super candy gas with a sweet grape on it. I love this. I think that this is a great commercial cultivation product. And then, truthfully, to round that out, man, it's a tough third for me. But honestly, we got one right now that, if you're familiar with like a fruit stripe gum or zebra stripe gum or whatever, right? Where the tattoos were on the labels.
Yeah.
All right, this smells like that. It's not like a specific, like some people say, oh, it's lime or it's orange or it's citrus or whatever. Like, I just think it smells like that, and it just really smokes. It's called Fruit Star.
Okay. Very
So
cool.
the company that I like to hunt the most, that I've had the best luck with compliant flower that is not selling to me as compliant flower, right? That they just happen to work out. The most compliant plants I've gotten is from a breeder called Elevate out of Seattle.
Okay.
These guys have been around for quite some time in Seattle medical markets, and they have a highly functional system for kind of showcasing their products and making it easy to buy them and getting them to you, right?
Yeah, no, I'm familiar with those guys for sure.
Yeah. So I'd say in terms of that for the client side of things.
I think that's great advice because I mean, again, if you are trying to do this compliant, like that, then becomes the young gamble is finding the genetics.
And some people will say, "Oh, we'll sell you these A flower seeds or whatever," but I'd say you're about as likely as buying
Every
some
plant's
medical,
different.
kind of buying medical seeds too. I mean, the medical market did not say that plants had to have high delta 9 to be sold. I mean, there's tons of compliant plants being sold in the medical markets right now. They don't
Yeah.
have any delta 9 in them, basically, and they're hitters, man. People are buying them. The stores are selling them.
Yeah.
People are buying it. So
Yeah, I mean, it's people like that's part of why here, I don't really pay attention to THC numbers. I have the luxury of living in a legal market, so I'm not having to tread that line very carefully. But yeah, I mean, there's a lot of weed, there's a lot of flower, I guess I should say, that would be hemp in any other program based on the current definitions, but it's grown in licensed facility, sold as weed in Colorado. So
it's licensed as medical cannabis and not certified hemp, right?
yeah, or
Because in
recreational.
the end, it's semantics. We're dealing with semantics and legalities, right? I am just a
Rose
guy
by
who,
any other name.
right, and I look, I'm just a simple person. I grew up here in the state. I don't want to go somewhere else. I've explored the idea of going somewhere else to go deeper into cannabis culture. I want to be here. I don't want to go somewhere else. So I'm willing to do what is required of me to be in a space. But the the real reality of it for me is that it isn't like if I was in Oklahoma or Colorado or California and this place shut down, I couldn't just go take my resume to 10 other places within 20 minutes, right? I'm it. Like, there's other things like me here, right? But when we're talking about the size and scale, we're doing 20,000 plants where we're creating those clones and growing 20,000 plants a year between the indoor and the light deprivation cultivation stuff, So it's like, it's not a tiny little thing. There isn't like a bailout. There's not like some other guy that I can go to here, right? Like if I got to go to somebody halfway across the world, 3,000 miles away, 1,000 miles away from me. So like with this whole thing, I'm operating and functioning within the legalities of things. I met this Italian guy that was willing to put millions of dollars into a facility in North Carolina, banking on the fact that 7.5 years ago was the only CBD you could sell, right? And he invested all this money and time and energy to get this place going. So, and for me, it's like this is it, right? This is it's either this or I can go back to training servers how to punch stuff into computers, man. And that's not an option for me. So, you create your own reality. They created this legalities and this framework for me to function in, and I've grown straight CBD. I've sprayed it with Delta 8. I've grown the initial autoflowers that started before A-flower, and people calling them one-to-one plants. 3.5 years ago, we were running those autoflowers that pre-harvest tested compliant, and this was before A-flower even existed. Or it was known as a thing, right? So I've been doing A-flower since the day it started. as just a flower. So it's like, give me the framework to do this in a legal sense. I'll do whatever it takes so that I can just have my simple little life and grow my plants and, sell them to the
Yeah.
people that want them.
No, it's something I definitely respect about you, man, is like you said, you could take your skill sets and your knowledge and do this in a place where you're jumping through less hoops, and but the commitment to where you are and learning how the market evolves. So on that note, what advice would you give to whether it's a home grower or someone who wants to get into growing, who, lives in a hemp market? What's your advice to these growers that want to that are in the space about growing, or that want to be in the space and hear what you're doing and are inspired?
Right. So, again, we're 3 years in, right? So it's really like, it's a gut check, for if you want to do it or not. Okay. So it's a prospector's industry still here in North Carolina. Okay. So it's a gamble. Um, if you want to, like, delve into the fully licensed and legal side of things where you're paying taxes, right? You are stepping into companies that are in their first 5 years of operation. And I mean, the stats are not necessarily that good for, not only new industry where people don't really, there is no manual or playbook in the area, right? But then it's just hard to keep a business past the first 3 years, right? Or 3 year cycles of it. So I think it's really like, my take on it is, if you want to be a hobbyist, then make sure that a part of your personality is to need this for yourself, not because you want to show other people. Because there is not an easy way for permitting, right? It's not an easy path. If you really want to do it and show people, go find a job that somewhere is licensed and work with them. And then realize that if you really want to do it and if you really are interested on that level, then you don't need to tell anyone or show anyone or any of
Right.
that, right? You just,
Shut the
like,
fuck up.
exactly, man. Just drink a glass and shut the fuck up, man. And just, man, kick back pop your tent open, bro, and kick your feet up, man, and just drink that glass and shut the fuck up and enjoy it, because it's like, it's just such a beautiful thing to even be able to do it.
Right.
I could never, the 13-year-old version of myself that started smoking pot could have never imagined that, you know,
Right. 28
that
years
that
later, you'd be hanging out growing
30
fields of
30 years later, right? 30 years
right.
later, it's crazy to think that I pay taxes, right? I've done tours with all the local law enforcement, the sheriffs, the guys who run the lead paramedics, the lead fire chiefs, all these things. When we first dropped in here, we were kind of like a circus to these guys. And the funniest experience from all that was about halfway through the tours, most people would interrupt me, and the most obvious time that happened was when all the police officers and the guys who ran the drug task force for Guilford County and Greensboro, which is a pretty astute group of guys, and I mean, they're really legit. They deal with their business down here really well. And they kind of looked at me halfway through, and the guy in charge of the whole department said, "Hey, I don't take this the wrong way, bud, but you're really smart. Like, you really know what you're doing. Like, this is like real science here. Like, this is very complex, and it's actually like 4 different jobs combined into one." And I said, "Well, thanks." Like, what are you doing there? Like, "Well, thanks." But it's like, it's a beautiful thing to even be able to do this in this time now. It's a 4,000-year tradition, and I can pay taxes to do it, right? So I don't
Yeah.
need to. I'm not like one of these guys that I don't not trying to drive BMWs and own boats and things like that. That's not my functionality of this. I am just a dirty old redneck that likes to grow flowers, and I love the predictability of it.
Would you grow weed if you couldn't tell anyone? There's the test.
Dude, that's my point in there, basically, right there. It's like, just do it because you want to do it. Like,
Right.
like, grow weed because you want to grow weed, not because you want to have credit for it or be that archetype or do something risky or try something new. Like, do it because you really want to do it, and you don't need a tree because a tree falls in the forest and no one's going to be there to see it.
Yeah, nothing wrong with
And I
that,
love
man.
teaching other people to do it, because it's the age-old adage of, man, you can give a man a fish, but to teach people how to fish in a place where there's no one else to teach them, it's like, that's where it's at for me. It's not really about me anymore. It's about the team I have and the crew of guys that I have underneath me, and the legacy that they'll create for the entire state, right? Because I can only go so far, but the 4 guys that are working with me and willing to spend their time with me and trust that they're giving me these years of their lives and it's going to really pay off for them. And that's what my main goal in it is to do that, is to get those guys going, right?
I love it.
Better than me at it.
Yeah, that's an incredible goal. I mean, that's why I'm doing this, why we're recording this, right? Like, how do we
Right.
translate our experiences to wider audiences, to more people? So
Right.
on that note, I'd like to give you a chance to plug yourself or plug some of the people you work with, and if people are listening and they either live in the area and they want to come check out some of the product your wares, where could they find it? Or what brands and businesses do you work with that may be worth them checking out?
Right. So, we took the mindset here of being the kings of the white label. So we realized that early on we didn't have the staff or the ability to do the breakdown of the product and deal with the customers. So in doing that, we don't have like a Green Family Farm brand, so to speak, right? We don't really have that going. So I always joke that we're the kings of the white label, because so many people come to us and then create a brand off of our flour or other products that we can um, make for them, right? But I do have a couple shops of the guys that I work with that I really like here. We've got in Greensboro, the shop is called Sigma. It's on MLK, and the shop's owner's name is Max. And shout out to Max. I think he's a great guy, and he really represents our product well. And he's been with us since we were just selling CBD. And great. I love the store. I think it's a great setup in his store. And then that's here in the Greensboro area. But another one of our clients that buys quite a bit of our stuff and white labels it would be a guy named Nick Bowden, who his company is called Bloomlight Cannabis, and that's based out of Goldsboro, North Carolina. And he does an amazing job with kind of in that area of the state in eastern North Carolina where there's not necessarily super high-end cannabis flower. He has just the craziest constant selection there, and he gets a lot of stuff from us, but he does from other places as well. And he is a neat guy, because he will, if you have some medical ailments, he will, or you're having some issues with some, normal kind of things, like if you're having some issues with sleep or hunger, things like that, or pain, right? Not like specific medical ailments, but just more generalized things. He'll kind of work on CBD capsules and other kind of tinctures that are a little more geared towards the healing side of things. And so I really like what he does with that. So truthfully, without having our own brand to plug, right? But okay, maybe I can, because pretty soon Green Family Farm's going to be dropping into the Puerto Rican medical market. We have a farm about an hour and some change from San Juan, that's been built over the last 2.5 years, and I'm actually getting my Puerto Rican medical license here in 3 weeks, and I will likely be traveling back and forth to that farm, and so we'll be in the Puerto Rican markets here pretty soon, which is kind of cool to think of. Right, just this guy from North Carolina, just a regular old redneck here hanging out, but linked up with this guy, this international guy, this Italian, and we just have been like baking soda and vinegar for each other, and it's just really worked well together, So that's another opportunity in our life. So I can plug us in that way, I guess. So if you're down in Puerto Rico, in the next summer, look out.
Very cool, man. Well, I appreciate you taking the time. It's always a pleasure talking to you. I feel like I learned a massive amount about the THCA side of things, and how home grow can exist in a place like that. That's it for now. New episodes drop weekly to help you grow better weed, make better hash. Hit subscribe, leave a review, share with a friend, fellow grower. And as always, I'm your host, Ben Owens, and we'll see you next time in the Hobby Grow.